All right, let's talk about this concept called territoriality. So you probably know that territory is just land, and land has defined borders, and people are very protective over their territory, and they're going to do what it takes to defend it. And so territoriality is the connection of people, but also their culture and their economic systems to where they live. So here's an analogy. If you try to take a toy away from a child, that child will get upset because they are territorial about their toy. It is theirs, it is their baby. They will take care of it, they will protect it, they want it to flourish, essentially. If you try to take land away from a country, you usually go to war because governments are territorial about their land because that's where their people live, that's where their culture is housed, and that's where their economy booms. That's where the goods are created, that's where they're manufactured, that's where they're sold. And so if you take this away, you're taking, of course, the territory away, but you're also taking this economic system, you're taking away the culture, you're taking away a lot more than just plain old land. Another definition that people may say is territoriality is this process in which political units, so territory, with fixed distinct boundaries are created, expanded, annexed, and or defended. And a big reason we connect this to territoriality is because some countries claim that other land is theirs, and they usually go to war to invade it or colonize it and call it their own. So that involves expanding their political boundaries. And as we go through this unit, you will see many examples of that. So some examples of territoriality in action. The best example is always any type of defense with the military. They'll defend the land, but also the resources within their borders. We have laws about the oceans and who can fish and extract marine resources. And for some countries, they have about 200 nautical miles of access to marine resources, and no other country can invade it and take those resources away. It belongs just to that country. So they can take all the fish out. They can literally do whatever within those certain boundaries. Establishing trade relationships as well, as this will affect the economic system of the country as well. And then finally, communicating with individuals in and out of the country. Communication is very important because it establishes an image and it shows a precedence and prioritization of your territory and your people and what happens within it. A concept we also want to kind of go over is nationalism, and this ties in pretty directly to territoriality. So nationalism is this advocacy and support for the political interests of one's nation, and it can fuel ties of a nation to a particular piece of land. In America, we have a strong American nationalism where people feel tied to the American homeland. And this forms the basis to claims for sovereignty and statehood. And I included Morocco here on the right as a little bit of an example. So Morocco is a small little country in northwestern Africa, but however, they have territorial claims over a good region of the Western Sahara. So that's kind of what this red dashed line outlines. And they view these southern provinces as Moroccan territory because previous Moroccan leaders historically occupied these territories. And so they have this political party here. I have the little image in the middle to represent this. And the platform for this political party maintains strong national ideas and has historically supported this concept called Greater Morocco. And that ties claims to these territories here in the Western Sahara that are currently part of other countries in Africa. So this strong sense of nationalism in Morocco ties into these territorial claims to land in the region. Now let's talk about a different concept called a shatter belt. A shatter belt is a region caught between stronger conflicting forces. You ever have like tension in your back? Maybe you sleep incorrectly, or you play a sport and you pull something. That's like a shatter belt in your body. There's a big force. It's strong. It's unstable. There's tension. A lot of tension. If we look at a map and we look at a region, say there's a lot of political instability and geopolitical tension, that's called a shatter belt. And these are often due to a lot of cultural and religious diversity. There's just a lot of tension and conflicts and challenges between different groups groups of people. For example, in Korea is divided by the US-backed South Korea and the Soviet and China-backed North Korea, and this is a hotspot even today for all kinds of political tension and ideological differences. Korea was a key battle site in the Cold War. Over 1 million armed forces died, and it's estimated up to 3 million civilians died as well. Not only that, North Korea lost 3,900 square kilometers of land, particularly to South Korea, which gained independence not even 10 years before the war ended. So yeah, tensions are high. Today, the capital of North Korea has declared that South Korea is the principal enemy, and that is a quotation for you. The border, the demilitarized zone, the DMZ that divides the two countries is heavily armed. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of the DMZs, but there's all kinds of soldiers and guards around the border between North and South Korea. And North Korea is also openly developing and testing nuclear weapons, and South Korea and most countries around the world are a little fearful of that. Another example is the Middle East, and I don't think it's any secret that there's conflict in the Middle East. I don't think there's ever been a period of time in history where there hasn't been war or some kind of violent armed challenge in this region. The biggest reason for this kind of conflict in the Middle East is due to religious differences, and territorial claims. As I'm recording this, there are 7 major ongoing armed conflicts in 7 different countries in the Middle East. Many of these conflicts have been the result of decades of various disputes and challenges. Of course, a lot of them are just simple territorial claims, and a lot of them are just religious differences as well. Most residents and most governments in the Middle East are Islam-based. However, there's different denominations and sects of Islam that do conflict and dispute with each other, and that's been going on for centuries and centuries of history. It never ends. Another concept is a choke point, and this is another kind of geographic concept because we know we're talking about political geography. And a simple definition of a choke point is like a narrow passageway. And so I am pretty sure this is based off the fact that your esophagus, if you clench your esophagus, you choke because you can't take air in and out. And your esophagus, it's not that wide. It's pretty narrow. So a narrow passageway in terms of geography is something like a strait or a canal where ships pass through, but it's very, very narrow. It's not like a big ocean where you got all this room. It's so luxurious. So this is very, very narrow, and if it's blocked, bad things can happen. And so these are key transportation routes, and then if they're blocked or another country takes control of them, that can lead to a lot of economic difficulties, but they can also use some kind of political leverage to influence other countries and to open back up these very critical transportation routes that transport tons and tons, billions of dollars of goods and services across the world. About 20% of the world's oil supplies passes through one choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, which is between Iran and Oman, and it connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. So the Middle East, of course, has a lot of natural resources like oil and natural gases, and so the Strait of Hormuz, which you can kind of see in the top right here, it's a very, very narrow, and it kind of curves as well. If this was blocked, oil wouldn't be distributed across the world. So gas prices would go up. It would be really bad for the global economy. And in 2011, Iran threatened to block this strait in response to sanctions over its nuclear program. I believe the UN placed sanctions on Iran because they wanted to limit their nuclear development as it was deemed as a global threat. And Iran responded by threatening to block the strait and disrupt the global economy. And this resulted in oil prices increasing, and then, of course, U.S. naval presence increased in the region as well to show some kind of defense and interference to Iran's threats. So this map here shows major choke points across the world and the volume of crude oil and petroleum products in millions of barrels per day that pass through these major choke points. So we look at the Panama Canal, about 2 million barrels per day pass through this canal, and they're distributed across North and South America. We can see here that the Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia is the most critical choke point, as the most products pass through this every single day. And so we can see here that they provide a lot of easy transportation to get around some of these continents. Like if you didn't have the Suez Canal, you have to go all the way down past the Cape of Good Hope and go around Africa. So it's very, very nice. Same thing with the Panama Canal. If that didn't exist, they would have to go all the way below South America, which is what they used to do before the Panama Canal was constructed. So it allows for easy transportation, but however, if there's any type of territorial disputes or if it's blocked, it's a major economic challenge for the entire world. And so the Suez Canal, we're going to highlight it because it was blocked pretty recently. So the Suez Canal is 120 miles long, and it's a very narrow canal, and it handles about 12% of global trade, so trade of the entire world, but especially these resources like oil, gas, but also just consumer goods that are moving between Europe and Asia. So it allows ships to go from the Red Sea in the Middle East up to the Mediterranean Sea that borders many of the countries in Europe. And without the Suez Canal, ships must go through the Cape of Good Hope. So if you remember, that is right on the bottom of South Africa. And that adds almost up to 2 weeks of passage, 5,000 miles. Egypt operates the canal under the Suez Canal Authority and collects billions of dollars in toll revenue. So this is kind of an economic benefit for Egypt because it borders and controls the Suez Canal. But in 2021, a giant container ship, this is a picture of it, was stuck. It was sideways due to high winds. And I really don't know physics that well, so I cannot tell you how winds were able to move a huge boat with tons and tons of weight from containers on it. But it did, and it blocks the canal for 6 days, and this disrupted global trade because parts for manufacturing and goods to be sold didn't arrive on time. It halted just global economy for 6 days or so, and it delayed over 400 ships, and there was billions of dollars in losses from this supply chain disruption. So that shows how critical these choke points are. The last concept we're going to talk about is called neocolonialism, and that's when developed countries influence or control less developed countries, but they don't do this through actual colonization. So it's not like the Berlin Conference when the European powers came together and divided Africa and extracted its goods and used its markets for the Industrial Revolution. It's not like that at all because colonization it really wouldn't work like that today. Today, we have countries pressuring or influencing these countries through a variety of economic, political, as well as cultural means. So economically, they can implement trade agreements, they can invest in these less developed countries, they can also provide loans to these less developed countries, and that can cause these countries to accumulate debt if they cannot pay off the loans, debt with interest too, and that adds up a lot over time. And what this essentially does is it creates an economic dependence. These less developed countries are relying on the more developed countries for their financing and for their investments, and if they didn't have this money, they wouldn't be able to provide infrastructure or support its population or support the manufacturing sector. So it's very important that they have these investments and they rely on them over time, and that creates this dependence. Politically, they can use diplomatic pressure. They can provide foreign aid under certain conditions. International organizations can also influence neocolonialism as well. An example of that would be the World Bank. They've been accused of providing loans that favor the developed countries that provide the money, but it leads to economic instability in the borrowing states, the less developed countries that may have a harder time paying them back. They can also use culture means as well. This is a lot of times done indirectly, and these essentially when dominant cultures, we've seen Western culture particularly, come into these less developed countries and have a higher degree of presence and impact. And we see, English spreading across the world. We see different goods and services from English-speaking countries, like from America. McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Apple, for instance, are spreading across the world, and the media is spreading across the world as well, like Hollywood movies. You can go to Europe and watch Iron Man in Italian. I remember watching American movies in Italian when I was in Italy. And so you can see that these cultures, especially Western culture, is spreading across the world through these interactions, through these influences that the more developed countries have. And so let's look at a very, very specific example called Francafrique. I'm going to call it Francafrique because that's more fun to say. So Francafrique refers to France's continued influence over their former African colonies. So these are independent states. They are no longer colonies of France. They are sovereign. However, France still influences them. So many countries use this currency, CFA franc. It's the name of two currencies used by not that many, 210 million people in 14 different African countries, and its currency is tied to the euro, which is the standard currency in the European Union, and it's also backed by the French treasury, limiting independent economic growth in these countries. So they are kind of tied to European, particularly France's economic conditions. France has also supported African leaders like Omar Bongo of Gabon, ensuring long-standing pro-French governments in Africa. So France provides kickbacks and open support and protection for these states that have leaders that support France. And if you don't support France, you're not going to get the French backing. They're not going to like you. French construction and telecom firms dominate infrastructure and media in countries like Senegal and Cameroon. Cameroon. So in Senegal, France co-financed an airport and a rail system, amongst many other infrastructure projects. In the Ivory Coast, French firms are involved in road renovations. AFD also supports urban development projects in Cameroon. French troops intervened in the Ivory Coast in 2002 and 2011. So that's an example of France maintaining troops in many of the African countries. They also did this in Mali during civil unrest in Islamic insurgencies as well. So they maintain a pretty big military presence as well, and they'll put down movements that they don't agree with. And now we talk about China, because China never goes away. And if you were to see a neocolonialism question on the AP exam, it's probably going to be about China, because this is the heart of neocolonialism examples. So China lends large sums of money to developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and they do this to construct infrastructure. However, it creates a high amount of debt for the countries attaining the loans. So Sri Lanka, for instance, which is a little island south of India, they have a port. They leased this port to China for almost 100 years because they couldn't repay their loans back. So this was their conditions. China would get the ports, they would take the profits from it, and that would be Sri Lanka's way of repaying these loans. So Sri Lanka is losing money because they're not making the profits off of these loans. In Kenya, in Eastern Africa, China built a railway, but Kenya must repay the costs, their debts essentially, for construction, while China actually manages the line themselves. It's Kenya's roadway, but it's also China's. China gets the management. Very, very fair. Chinese companies invest heavily in mining and oil in a lot of these research-rich countries. So in Zambia, they have firms that control much of the copper mining industry, and this makes the country vulnerable to Chinese business decisions. So these business decisions can impact the overall economy of these countries, or particularly the local areas where they're doing this mining or resource extraction. So this shows a high degree of influence that China, a pretty developed country, has over these less developed countries in Africa and South Asia. And so we can connect neocolonialism now to territoriality. So how does neocolonialism relate to this concept of territoriality? Well, it involves powerful countries exerting influence over resources, the economy, and governance of less powerful states. And this impacts how territories are overall controlled. This undermines sovereignty because it limits independent decision making, it limits economic growth, or at least independent economic growth, as well as just usage of the land and the territories. Like China was able to control that railway that developed. It's Kenya's railway, but China gets to have control and say so in decision making over how that railway is run. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video though. Adios.